Parsha. Okay.
Show some respect, he's not the regular rabbi.
No, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Bobby and I are good friends.
A rabbi's a rabbi.
That's right. So do they say. All right. I don't know if you normally do this in class, but I believe we can start with a bracha.
Yeah.
And it's right there. And let's say it together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzidkanu v'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. So you know that there's a minhag, a custom, that when you finish reading a book of the Torah, you say, Hazak, Hazak, V'nit Hazek. May you go from strength to strength. I believe we should have a corollary response when we begin the reading of a new book by the saying of the Shechianu. So since we are beginning Vayikra this week, if you would join me, Baruch atah Amen. Amen. So, okay. This particular book of the Torah goes by a lot of different names. And the names are really instructive in terms of not only what the content is, but also what the purpose of the book was. So it's known not just as Vayikra, which is the first word of the Parsha, which we will talk about significantly, but it's also known as Torat Kohanim, the Torah of the Kohen. Now, if you remember the structuring of the people during the wilderness period and afterwards, the tribe of Levi was given the role and responsibility of managing the religious life of the other tribes. But among the Levites, there were a higher status group of families, the Merari, the Kohat, and the Gershon. These three families had an additional structure, responsibility, and status known as Kohanim, which gets translated into English as priests, which is kind of awkward considering we have other faith communities that use the term priest, and they're not necessarily interrelated. So Torah Kohanim refers to the idea that this book is really the instruction manual for the role of the Kohen. And what we're talking about is a sacrificial system. What that means, of course, is that at that point during the biblical period, the way in which Jews addressed their Judaism was through the bringing of sacrifices to the sanctuary, whether it be the Ohel Moed, the temporary sanctuary of the period of this portion, or later on when the sanctuary was built and centralized in Jerusalem. Okay? Now, when we think of this process, for modern Jews, it is either a curio or totally unrelatable. The idea that people brought cows or goats or turtle doves or meal offerings to someone else, and they kind of vicariously took away whatever the issue was. And there are many, many different types of these offerings that we will see in the parasha itself. How many of you are familiar with a custom that still exists among certain segments of our Jewish community known as slugging kaporos? Okay, what do you know about it?
I suppose it, when you swing a chicken above your head and the chicken will take the,
Well, it was done at the period of the High Holy Days, where you vicariously transferred your misdeeds to the chicken. Now, this synagogue and the synagogues that I've been involved with used to, on Rosh Hashanah afternoon, go to a body of water, right, and that's the same kind of concept, that you threw pieces of bread into the water as a way to symbolically unburden yourself. You following me so far? Yes, Ben.
Did you get to eat the chicken?
Okay.
No, sir,
Come up with something.
who would think you get some?
I mean, it's an odd thing.
Well, it's a brilliant question, because the whole concept of sacrifice, which is so yuckily defined and described in the book of Vayikra, is really about a person who has either done something by mistake or has said something that isn't true or caused an issue. They vicariously transferred it into this sacrificial beast that took it away, somehow alleviated what their issue was. Now, in terms of the Judaism that we're familiar with, prayer became the substitute. Prayer became the substitute for that concept of a physical sacrifice. Okay.
This is a silly question.
No,
Was the chicken alive or dead?
The chicken was alive.
The chicken was alive, and
Yeah.
after they did that, was the chicken dead?
No, not necessarily. There's a terrible joke about a person who is sight impaired, blind, goes into Bloomingdale's with their dog. And they take the dog up by the hind legs and they're flinging the dog around their head, and people say, "What are you doing to the dog?" He said, "Just looking around." Sorry, okay,
I've actually got a question about that.
yes,
What do you do with the chicken if you're not gonna kill it?
I don't know, it's not my world, okay? I never did it, I only know about it academically, I don't know it as a physical practice. But what we're talking about is the transference of one's internal misdeed onto something else. And if you consider that as kind of the modicum of what the sacrificial model is about, you can understand it a lot closer. Now, what's intriguing is this next paragraph. Traditionally been the first book to be studied by children in the Cheder. Now, I want you to think about how absolutely conflicting that is. Okay? Do you have any response to that?
What about hair?
Cheder is like it's like the Orthodox training school for kids,
Ah,
okay? What makes or challenges you about the way that that's put?
Well, these are little children, you would think.
Forget the children, they are children, why would this be the first? Let me do it.
Sets up the rule of commands.
No, I don't think it's about a rule of command. What makes it so antithetical is that we don't follow sacrificial models anymore. Once the rabbinic model came to be the normative structure of Jewish life, sacrifices ended. Let's put it into a time frame, okay? The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. 1956 years ago, okay? The temple in Jerusalem, both the first and the second temple, were places where all of this was practiced. We are aware that at the time prior to the destruction of the second temple, there were two competing ideologies of Jewish practice and Jewish life. One was clearly the priestly model, the sacrifices that went on in the temple itself. And we know that from historic documents, even from the Christian Gospels, though it is presented powerfully negative about what went on in the temple, but it existed. The Gospels refer to that segment of Jewish experience as Sadducees, but it was the Levitical priesthood model. We also know that there was a new kind of ideology springing out probably a few hundred years before that, that ultimately becomes what we practice, which is rabbinic Judaism. Now, if this doesn't make sense to anyone, you have to stop me because I get caught in rabbit holes and I want to make sure that you all get it and understand. The rabbinic and the priestly were basically in loggerheads with each other at the time. The rabbinic model, which so influences modern Judaism because it is the successor form of Judaism after the temple is destroyed in the year 70. The sacrificial model ends. It's over. There's no place for it to go. The rabbis, who become the dominant formulation, teach a very different way of expressing one's identity through learning, practice, and experience. Folkways, yes.
Wasn't it also a little different after the destruction of the second temple? Not just that there wasn't a place to sacrifice, but you needed a way to connect with God, and learning about God could be helpful.
Well, both of those streams had been in existence, and when you couldn't go to the temple anymore, you basically folded into the rabbinic model. Now, what's intriguing about it, and it's not necessarily related to Vayikra, is the rabbis, in their incredible genius of integration, found ways to continue to give status to Levites and Kohanim. How many of you are familiar with the Jewish practice of Pidyon Haben? Okay, it's not a pig in the blanket, okay?
First.
Well, it's not at the bris. It's
Fine.
if the firstborn is born in a vaginal delivery and is a boy, if the mother is not part of either a Levite or a Kohanim family, the child's status, it needs to be symbolically offered to a Kohen and then brought back. Well, think about how crazy that is that we still do something like that, since we don't really recognize those statuses in the historical way. And yet, in a traditional synagogue, who gets called to the Torah first?
Oh, yeah.
The Kohen, which is like ironic for the following profound reason. All of you are familiar with the rabbinic way of interpretation, right? Torah shebiktav, Torah sheba'al peh. The Torah which is written, and the Torah which is ba'al peh, which is oral. Okay, twofold law. That's the rabbinic model. The fantasy that the rabbis taught was that as Moses got the law on Sinai, God whispered in his ear the oral law. Now you may say, what's oral law? Have you studied any of that at all along your way?
Who wrote
I
it
think you
down
have.
later on?
I'm sorry?
Someone wrote it down later on.
Well, some of the oral law has been written down and it became the Mishnah, and then the conversation on the Mishnah became the Gemara, which came together to become the Talmud, and so on and so forth. But the oral tradition is an example of it is in the Torah, it tells you to build a sukkah. It doesn't tell you how big or wide or what a sukkah is. In the Mishnah, it described the various dimensions or the concept of the building of the sukkah. That's the kind of dynamic of oral and written law. But here's the part that I find so fascinating. You give a status to the Kohen at a Torah reading, and what you're really doing is bringing them into a process where they are knowingly or unknowingly acknowledging the twofold law, oral and written. Whereas during the time that we're talking about before the destruction of the Second Temple, it was very clear that those who were part of the sanctuary model, what does that say?
Says there's a.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
you get the
just-
remote for you and
okay.
take care of
You do okay.
I don't
I got
have, I don't have a
that.
remote.
Yeah, you scoot it a little bit. You do have a remote.
Is it over there?
Yeah.
Okay. What that is doing is saying to that Kohen, we're giving you status, but understand that your status is now interrelated to a new process, okay? So the idea of teaching this to children in a cheder is kind of peculiar, considering we don't follow it anymore. We don't do it. There are meshuggahs in the Jewish world who want to rebuild the temple. There was a guy from Miami who caused a big stir in Jerusalem with kind of conflict between the Temple Mount police and people who wanted to like rebuild the temple. Well, you know, in order to rebuild the temple, you have to tear down the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
Not happening.
It's
Okay. Okay, so the book of Vayikra focuses on priestly instructions and marks a pivot from the historical narrative of Exodus to the spiritual and ritual life of the Israelites at Mount Sinai. Okay? So here are the various kinds of offering. A burnt offering, a grain offering, a peace offering, a sin offering, and a guilt offering. Yes,
What's the difference between a sin offering and a guilt offering?
well, they obviously make a distinction between one's sense of guilt and one having committed an offense.
Wouldn't everyone in the community make the person who committed the offense feel guilty?
Remember what should happen in the, what happened in my synagogue, I don't know if I've been here on Kol Nidra, but I don't recall. There is a bracha which is said traditionally before Kol Nidre, which says, Yeshiva Shemala, Yeshiva Shemala. By the authority of the court on high and the court below, we are permitted to pray with those who have transgressed. The idea being that the totality of the community is acknowledging misdeed. Now, one of the things, and I apologize for taking so much time doing this, but maybe it's fun. I don't know. It's fun for me. The word sin has been baptized eternally by Christianity.
Absolutely.
Okay? The Hebrew word for that gets mistranslated as sin, you remember the word? It's right there.
Okay, well, I was in this.
We were agreed.
We know that, not making the mark, missing the mark.
Exactly. Sin for Judaism is not an inherent biological flaw of an individual. It is missing the mark, as you say, which ultimately means, and the imagery comes to us from Proto-Semitic languages regarding the visual of archery. And if any of you went to camp and were good campers, you did archery, okay? And the idea was you had what in front of you that you were aiming for?
A target.
A target. And what happened when you let the arrow go? What were your options?
You hit the target or you didn't.
That's correct. When you miss the target, that is what concept of sin means in Judaism.
They didn't give me much of trouble for missing the target. I never hit it.
Okay, so
Usually miss the
in
whole
our
thing.
world, the idea is kind of an experience that you can get a do-over and try again.
Rabbi,
Yes, sir.
but nothing, there are laws in the Torah and nothing here seems to be a violation of a law. We have missing the mark and feel guilty. But nowhere does it say, you know, what happens if you killed someone or, you know, all of the other laws that exist.
Okay. Let me respond in this way. The norms of the Torah and rabbinic practice provide at the core a perception that human beings have free will and therefore have made those choices that have come to bad outcomes. The only ones that cannot be removed have to do with the killing of another human being. You cannot be absolved of that. All of the others, there are pathways to make restitution. Look, there's a concept, and we used to do it in study group, before High Holy Days, people were supposed to go to other people and ask for their forgiveness. And in the High Holiday Prayer Book, it very clearly said from rabbinic text, the Day of Atonement does not atone until you have made your amends to other human beings. That God's forgiveness is dependent upon the way in which your relationships of other human beings, which is a very powerful kind of a statement and very important, because other religious communities are only concerned about the individual's relationship with God, and human beings are almost out of the process. All forgiveness comes from God. It's not necessarily from the other human being. Guilt, honestly, has gotten a bad rap. It's the meat and potatoes of every psychologist in the world, playing on people's feeling of guilt. Well, I believe guilt can be a very positive emotion if it motivates someone to realize they've made a mistake. The imagery from my childhood, which taught me everything, were cartoons. Okay? You remember the cartoons with Pluto? Okay? Pluto is always annoyed by the cat in the family. And one day the cat falls down the well, and Pluto goes to look over the well, and he's deciding what to do. And on his shoulders jump two little Plutos, one with a halo and one with a pitchfork, remember?
Right.
And the one says, the cat's a pain in the neck, let the cat drown. It was like, oh, you have to save the cat, you have to save the cat. What that is describing is ultimately the kind of tension that should go on within a human being in the way in which the rabbis defined the distinction between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to do good and the inclination to do evil. It's in all of us and it exists. The question is, how do you deal with it? That's what guilt is about. Okay. The commentary suggests that while the ritual of animal sacrifice is not practiced today, the underlying need to draw close to the divine, acknowledge his mistakes, and live with humanity is the way prayer is supposed to function. The Hebrew word for a sacrifice, you know it? Korban. The root is harav, which means to draw near. It was a process by which an individual drew nearer to God by moving away from where they had made the mistake. A korban, and the korban came in many different varieties. Okay. So this is the third book of the Torah, and it provides us with the idea of sacrifices, how to draw close. And for those of you, when we look at the text in Sepharia, which we will do as we move forward, you will notice that there is an anomaly in the actual Torah text, which I think Sepharia shows that the word Vayikra, the last Hebrew letter is an aleph, but it is smaller than the other letters in the same word. The rabbis were great sticklers. They scoured text to look for anomalies and peculiar circumstances, and when they found them, they imbued them with symbolic meaning that is either accurate or inaccurate. Yes?
The guy who was writing it down couldn't have just been tired? Not the first one, God wrote the first one. The second
Now,
one.
God didn't write it, Moses wrote it,
Well,
okay?
he might have just been tired, long day, small, let's go to bed.
There are many, you can be as, and I don't mean this in a negative way, as cynical about it as you like. What the rabbis, and I'm not saying that you're being cynical, I'm just saying that looking at something like this, you can either say, oh, it's just an error in printing, or it's an error the way the person wrote it, or it has some greater meaning. Yes?
I'm not sure it's part of it. I thought it, it's word kadosh. No, it's
That's not here.
it's not. Where
No.
was that? I thought it was.
That's- Well, that's from Isaiah responding to God's presence in the world.
I think it's the.
And then we put it into the Kedusha. And it's in the service on the morning service. Okay. What I'm saying to you is the rabbis developed different ways of looking at text. And the Hebrew word acronym is the word pardes. Okay?
Yeah.
Jews invented acronyms. I've said this many times before. We should be very proud of ourselves. Something like Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the three first letters. Pardes is the interpretive model of how the rabbinic mind looked at text. So we break it down into the words. The first letter, the P, is for the word pshat, the simple meaning of the text. It says he went for a walk, he went for a walk. The resh is the remez, the hint. Well, what's really behind the person taking the walk? The drash is the midrash, the explanation concept of the text. He was taking a walk because he had to go visit his mother and his father and blah, blah. It's like Abraham and the idols. That's a drash. The last letter of Pardes is a samet for the Hebrew word sod, which means hidden. What is the hidden meaning in taking a walk? Like, what's the hidden meaning in the olive? It's the same attempt. Look, people didn't have Netflix, okay? They had wild intellectual abilities and they used them interpreting and in connecting. Okay. The word Vayikra, which is the name of the Parsha and the name of this third book of the Torah, means and he called. Who called what? Yes?
That was my question.
Okay. That's what we're gonna look at. Let's see what else I have here. Okay. The Hebrew word, as I mentioned, means proximity, and it comes from the root, meaning to draw near. Specifically, it was a way of offering kindness and generosity, fostering a direct, intentional, intimate relationship with God. As much as we are uncomfortable or offended by the detail that we read in Leviticus, especially when we get to Tazria and Sorah, which talks about this perception of leprosy or whatever, and we do the big yuck. It was intended to create a sense of relationship. And I think if we can hold on to that, we can see a continuity between this world, which was so radically different from our world, to the way in which we are encouraged to practice our Judaism today. Atonement and responsibility. Atonement for unintended sins or lapses in spiritual awareness. The offering was to bring an inner sense into alignment with God and foster deeper accountability. Okay. The shift from temple to prayer. Well, the Parsha focuses on animal sacrifices, which, as we said, ceased with the destruction of the temple, implies that even without a temple, we can connect to the divine and achieve spiritual closeness through study and prayer, says the Jewish Journal. What that's really teaching us is that is the essence of the rabbinic model. We don't have sacrifices anymore. We have to find it in a different manner. The Torah.org explains the difference between the holy calling of Moses and the random happening upon Vayikar of a lower prophecy. It's the ability to hear God's voice from within the tent of meeting. Okay. Yes.
When they talk about prayer, does it have to be a formal prayer with a, group of 10? Or can it be an individual?
Okay, you're asking a very important question. And at one point, I think I did a lunch and learn on the evolution of Jewish expressional prayer. Judaism is what is known as a liturgical religion. The Catholic community is liturgical. For any of you who have been into any of the Protestant churches, except for the Episcopalians, they don't have a book they hand you. They hand you a flyer. And in the flyer are a group of hymns, and the hymns are kind of the structural model of what their prayer service looks like. And in between it, they'll add other kinds of verbal expression, but it's not formalized. Our prayer book, known as a Siddur, comes from the Hebrew word, which we'll also experience in a week and a half, or a Seder. It means order, exactly. It refers to the fact that we have, over the decades and millennia, established a pattern for public prayer. And let me give you one of my great upsets. Oh, gosh. Okay, I'm going there. When you guys go to synagogue and either the rabbi or the chazan says, Baruch Hu et Adonai Havorach, and it gets sung, you will sing both lines. You're not supposed to.
Right.
One is a call out to you, and the other is your response. It is antiphonal. It's not a song. The person who is leading the service, and you only do that when you have a minyan, because up until that, it's not public prayer. Public prayer occurs with 10 historically men and 10 human beings today. The person says, Baruch Hu et Adonai Havarach. Blessed is Adonai, the one who is blessed. The congregation responds and it says, Baruch Adonai Havarach le'olam va'ed. Blessed is Adonai forever and ever, as an affirmation of what the first person said. It is not to be a 2-line song that everybody joins in. It needs to be shared with other people because they're missing, I believe, the ultimate power of what that is supposed to mean. It is the call to worship and you are responding. Yes, sir.
Never mind, it would just go into the change room.
Okay.
So do you need, can you,
Pray on your own? Absolutely.
okay, does
Absolutely.
does it matter? Is either
It doesn't.
more spiritual or more valid?
The
What's the
idea
difference?
is there was a requirement for public prayer
Mhm.
that you needed 10 people, which ultimately meant you didn't read the Torah without the 10 people there. Okay, which it doesn't mean that you are unable to do prayer wherever you might find the ability to do that. It's teaching you that there is a value in communal prayer
Mhm.
that goes beyond just the individual. Part of what our great challenge in the 21st century is that we've all become so individually perceived of ourselves that we are very reluctant to be in community. And being in community is more than just sitting at tables. It really refers to an identity. And I did this, I think, at Lunch and Learn a couple of weeks ago. The idea is Judaism has both an individual covenant and a communal covenant. We are to acknowledge both of them. We have responsibilities to ourselves as well as responsibility to the klal, to the totality of our community. The culture that we live in has become more and more individualized to the point of almost the rejection of any kind of communal interaction. Yes, sir.
So we're doing it wrong when we're repeating back twice.
Most people,
Correct way.
the minute the chazan starts singing Baruch Hu et Adonai, everybody sings along with them.
So why aren't we corrected?
I think they're too kind, or people weren't necessarily,
So are the rabbis here aware?
I would assume so.
Probably.
Why didn't they get corrected?
It's not for me to, I mean, look,
Well, if we're being taught it, but we're being taught the wrong thing, it's like what's the point?
I don't disagree with you, but look, being a rabbi is not the easiest. And it's even harder today. in terms of people's ability to be affronted by any sort of,
Criticism.
say again?
Criticism.
It's not criticism, it's,
It's pick your battles.
look,
It's bigger than that.
Lights off.
It's done incorrectly.
Well, but a lot of us haven't taken a class on how to pray and
Right.
service.
You just,
We're not
you
gonna
come, you come and you experience it
Yeah.
and you learn it within the qual, within the community.
But it's not about us, it's
It
about.
is about us. You have to do what's right for you and if
Well,
someone.
no, he's teaching that what we've been doing is incorrect. It's not an individual thing. He said that what we've been doing is incorrect. If we're doing it incorrect and we're in service and the rabbi doesn't correct the behavior, what's the point of all of this?
Mitch, I've been doing it correctly, I wanna point out when you say we, just don't include me in this one.
Oh, wait, it's not
I
about
just-
individuals at this point.
I'm trying to bring down your
Look,
temperature.
Well, it's a very intriguing challenge about how people get oriented and how they come to understand what their own individual role and responsibility is. I guess,
One of the issues is a lot of us don't speak Hebrew, so you don't know what you're saying.
that's true.
I'm gonna put it a little differently.
Please,
I'm gonna say that let's say the average kid who went to Hebrew school, and a lot of them don't now, they'll get a tutor to learn their Hebrew, their Torah portion for their bat mitzvah.
Yeah.
But let's say the average person like me who went to Hebrew school a long time ago, we were either bar or bat mitzvah or till confirmation. So if you went 3 times a week for 2 hours, you ended up with something like a first grade education in your religious studies. And I can say this for Catholics. In all the years that they go once a week for their whole lives, let's say a devout Catholic, not the holiest of holies, they're gonna end up with an adult education
not true.
or,
It's really
okay.
not true, because I
Hear
teach this.
Okay,
I
let's hear
teach
me
it.
out a little bit. But we're walking into we're walking in on Yom Kippur with, no, I've gotten more adults, right? So I've learned things along the way. But we're walking into Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur with or to someone's bar mitzvah on a Saturday. With basically a first grade education, so the rabbi who sees you on Saturday is not gonna correct you because he's happy that you even showed up on a Saturday. So is that one little thing saying it wrong? No, does it raise it up so much higher? Yeah, now you're learning about it, now you know the right way. So now when you do that prayer, you'll do it better.
Okay.
That's
Let me
my comment.
just also deal with one of the things that you said, which is always interesting to me. It is impossible and illogical to ever use the term bar mitzvah as if it were something that someone could do to you and it was past tense.
It's not a word.
It's not a verb. It is a status. A bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah is a son or a daughter of the commandments. The idea being that in Jewish tradition, at the age of 13, whether rightly or wrongly, an individual was to become responsible on their own for commandments. Many of you were in college when the status of a college student was challenged by a concept known in loco parentis, whether the college was responsible for you as an adult or you were a total emancipated individual. Bar bat mitzvah, there was a bracha that was said, thank you, by the parent, the father. Thank you, God, for freeing me of the obligation of this child.
Yeah, I can really work out.
What that really meant was, I am no longer responsible for observing whether they keep commandments or not. It is now they're responsible to keep the commandments. It's another example of how modern culture has corrupted what are very core, I believe, valuable Jewish ideas and concepts, because it's very common. Someone said, I was bar mitzvah at Temple Bethel in 1973. Well, you really weren't. you attended a Shabbat morning service. And remember, the other piece, and I apologize for going off in this tangent, but it's part of the Vayikra model in my mind. Reading the Torah doesn't make you a bar bat mitzvah. The fact that you can now be called to the reading of the Torah is an acknowledgement to the community that, oh, this kid's 13 years old and is now hopefully choosing to be responsible as opposed to just getting drunk at the party, okay?
Alright,
It's the act of being called that acknowledges you as more than eligible to do it. Just like when you're 18 years old, you can vote, but you don't have to. Or you can be drafted, used to be, but you don't have to.
But you can drink.
When you're 21, you have an option of drinking or not drinking. 13 is that age, whether it's right or wrong, of opportunity to make the choice to either be part or not. And I just think we have to reinforce some of this. Okay, let's go on. What else do I have here? Okay, I'm going to a different screen.
What's the right language to use about a bar mitzvah?
I'm a bar mitzvah.
Well, the goal would be that you would be a ongoing,
And it
Let me
was the
just-
language.
I have to get this,
you're over 13, go have fun.
what it should mean was bar mitzvah should be a status that carries with you as a definition of who and what your behaviors are, as opposed to something that happened to you at some point in time.
So what if the limit is when you lead a 13-year-old at the service? Or at any,
Mazel tov. I mean, I guess, but now you have responsibilities to carry forward the covenant and the tradition in your own life, which in many cases is never explained. So,
But would you say I have become a bar bat mitzvah?
yes, you would.
Yes.
Okay, I have to figure out, how do I get, oh, I know what to do. I know what to do. I figured it out.
They didn't teach you this in the school.
No, they didn't.
I don't think they had like MacBooks in medical school.
I don't know how to get this up.
Rabbi, I'm coming, Rabbi.
while he comes, Rabbi,
What you need is.
When I was student,
You need grandchildren.
How do I get this up?
You're gonna go back to Zoom.
Yeah, I don't think it's a Zoom. link.
No,
It's a
you
live
can
stream.
teach them where you have Zoom. Here,
No, but it's not Zoom. It's not a Zoom.
this is a Zoom.
No, it's a live stream.
This is what we're looking at. This is a Zoom, this is also a live stream. You do both at once. You go over here. Here, green. Oh, go to upward. And then there you go. Click on Leviticus and Parsha, and then press share.
Good, got it.
There we go.
Okay.
Let me make sure it shows the whole thing. It does, okay.
Okay, so,
There's.
all right, so here we are at the very beginning of the Parsha. And here is the first verse. Daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta alehem hadam ki karav mikem korban ladodai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to God, you shall choose your offering from the herd or the flock. Okay? Pretty descriptive, right? Any questions at all or concerns about it? Yes.
Should it be a male cattle, a female cattle, a young cattle, an old cattle?
Does the text tell you one or the other?
Well, I know later on they said make it your best cattle.
Yes,
Well, that's what it is.
well,
Block is done.
let's take a look at. All right, who is this instruction being given to?
Moses.
Okay, so, and where is this taking place?
Content meeting,
Okay, and what is the role of the tent of meeting?
it's outside of the community, after the Jews built, Israelites built the golden calf. So it's where God and Moses can meet outside of the community.
Okay, it is a tent of meeting, which becomes the prototype of a sanctuary. And we know from the descriptions we have read and will read about it, it's quite an elaborate entity. But we also know that it's portable. Okay, and we know that it can be put up and taken down, and we saw descriptions of how it was to be carried by the Levites. Okay, the Levites were the Balagola. If anybody speaks Yiddish in the room, they're the teamsters who moved the items. It was the Kohanim who did the deeds inside. Okay, so this Parsha begins with bringing an offering. And when the text says that to the people, what does that imply that they hear?
God wants cattle.
Well, I'm thinking they're familiar with this already. Okay, they don't have to be explained that they are supposed to be doing this. It is a reinforcement of something that they have either learned about or prior experience.
In other cultures, right?
No, in our culture, this is not new.
Well,
Okay,
even before us, like, in the new world, they're practicing sacrifice, and it appears to be a common form of
behavior.
behavior.
Okay. And I like the fact that you're kind of bringing an anthropological spin on where did this come from? But our text is not acknowledging any of that. You're bringing in the kind of outside thing that might have driven the concept. And I think your point is very important as a kind of paradigm. And that is the Hebrew Bible is not ultimately unique. There are many different creation stories. There are many, many different stories of the flood. But our stories have a uniqueness to them. I'll give you an example. Any of you familiar with the Gilgamesh epic? Yes? No? What do you remember from Gilgamesh? It's one of the creation stories of the ancient Near East. You remember? The world is created by accident. Gods are fighting with each other, and in the midst of the fight, they kick off some matter and it creates the world. Not the most positive way to look at the world, right? When you look at the beginning of Genesis, what does it say over and over again as creation takes place?
God planned it all.
Kitov.
It was good.
It was good. The idea being that our perspective on creation was it was thoughtful, it was benevolent, and it was imbued with a kind of benevolence into it. The same thing is true regarding the story of the flood. The classic story is known as the Utnapishtim story, which talks about the concept of the flood. Our story is a nuance on it and a twist. So in the same way, when we are talking about animal sacrifices, as gory and as difficult as they may be, they are descriptive for the sole purpose of how one draws near to God. The animal is the implement of the human heart, which gets transferred, as we're saying today, into the process of prayer and study in the rabbinic model. They just change modules. Am I making some sense? Yes, sir.
Cows were expensive. They're still expensive. Wouldn't that be like giving a big donation versus say a
Okay, you're adding another factor to this, which may explain why this was something of significance. If you are a herder and you are required to bring an animal of your herd, it's not without impact on your world,
Absolutely.
okay? The idea does transfer into our responsibilities, that being a thoughtful and engaged Jew is more than just being anyone else. And this is rhetorical, do our synagogues ask us to live up to that in a way that makes it challenging for our boundaries? What am I talking about?
Donations,
No, I'm not talking about donations, honestly, at all.
when you're saying.
I'm talking about most people today, in their embrace of modernity, are somewhat lackadaisical about Jewish norms in the way in which they live their lives. If you had to ask the question, if I'm gonna give up this or do this, what am I gonna do? I don't think many modern Jews, except for those, and not necessarily within the Orthodox community, are actually defining their lifestyle by their identity as opposed to making it all fit together. If I make any sense.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So this is how you make that offering. You put a hand on the head of the burnt offering so that it may be acceptable in your behalf in expiation for you. Okay, we are talking about symbolic transference. Okay? You following what I'm saying? How many of you are familiar with the concept of the Azazel? Tell me about what you know.
It's the sacrificial goat that
Yes.
was released out at the camp and just let it wander goes there.
Right. Another example of transference onto another object. And what you can see here is some of the pre-thinking that becomes crystallized in a Christian theological setting of the role of Jesus. Jesus becomes the representation of the transference of sacrificial concept onto an individual. Yes.
So even though they kind of outlawed this later, Christians were okay with human sacrifice.
Well, they don't see it in that manner, okay? The way in which this evolves is the idea that that sacrificial death was the alleviation of sin of all human beings. Now, Judaism never had that concept because Judaism taught it was the individual's responsibility to deal with their own behaviors. At the first century time period, the mythology of Christianity, and not in a negative sense, is that sin was so overwhelming and overburdening that individuals could no longer remove it, and the only way that it could take place is through a cataclysmic shift by the expiational death of this, in their view, messianic character, who somehow, in Jesus's death, in Jesus, he saved all of us, which was beyond Jewish understandings, but it's very powerful, clearly to 1.8 billion people in the world. Yes,
I grew up Catholic and I converted to Judaism,
yes.
so I know about like the Eucharist, Transfiguration. I know every week we would have that wafer. You're continuing that acknowledgement he died for you.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Aren't most cultures, though, it's interesting, I think a family way, they do the same thing with sacrifices, all the different religions. I mean, primitive, etc. It's just, you bring gifts, you do this, sacrifice, that kind of thing.
Well, I think what you're addressing, Margaret, is the idea that somehow an individual has to give up themselves in order to acknowledge their both sincerity and engagement in ways that are either symbolic or powerful. And to what Spencer was asking earlier, if I am a herder, it's a big deal for me to give up one of my flock. But it clearly represented something that was more important to me than my own material ownership. That I wanted or needed to do this in order to fulfill my role and responsibility if I had made these errors along the way. Look, it gets a bad rap, but on Yom Kippur, the liturgy says, what alleviates the status that we're in? Prayer, atonement, and tzedakah. So what gets the bad rap? The synagogue has a high holiday appeal. Well, the idea was that somehow that was in concert with making it better. When Martin Luther in the 16th century rails against the quote indulgences of the Catholic Church, he's really, in many ways, even if it was totally corrupted, it was inherently part of the Jewish process of how one regains a normal status. Prayer, charity, and acknowledgement of what we have done wrong. Am I making some sense?
Yeah, but the indulgences took over the other two, I mean, giving
Yes.
took over the importance of the other two.
Yes.
And it just became a monetary way to get.
Buy your way out.
Buy your way out.
Right, okay.
You don't buy our way out. Have you seen anyone in this room?
No.
Built everyone for it.
Traditional congregations, that it's a high holiday appeal, we pay dues, which doesn't exist in the rest of the community.
But what Bobby is saying is not buying your way out. She's talking about indulgences and the way in which they have been interpreted historically within the context of the 16th century. That's very different. Tzedakah is part of Jewish obligation and responsibility. It just is. Most people don't think that anymore. Okay,
I just have an important question.
please.
Is there a caveat in the fact that when one gives, it must be in a sincere, authentic way versus one wanting to do it for show, for an ego?
One would hope. One would hope. And I think you're identifying part of the challenge of modern philanthropy.
Okay.
Maimonides does a listing of the highest levels of tzedakah.
Anonymous is another.
Okay,
Right.
yes, but let's also remember that charity has gotten a bad name because it also has been imbued with a kind of Christian perspective of lowliness. The Hebrew word is tzedakah, the root is tzedek, means justice, okay? When you read Leviticus 19, and it's one of the great passages in Leviticus as opposed to the ones that we're looking at today, it talks about how you have an obligation to leave the corners of your field and your vineyards for those who are less fortunate. It's not a handout. It is their right to gather that. It's part of an economic system that deals with poverty, not as a curse from God, but as a ultimate reality of an economic order. You following me?
Yes,
It's
yes.
important to embrace that because it makes sense. You want to say something, you're gonna get the closing line.
That's something that Maddie said. I mean, I do a lot of fundraising, and I feel like I don't care why someone gives, it's the idea they give. I don't, if they're
No,
doing it for show,
I hear
whatever,
you.
care about it.
Yes,
They're giving.
but let's talk about what the ideal would be.
Yeah.
There is an ideal, and look, there are people one of the great dilemmas of modern Jewish existence is that Jews who had wealth used to give to Jewish causes and needs because the non-Jewish world wasn't so excited about Jewish money. They saw it as tainted. Well, that has changed in our lifetimes, where institutions like,
Everyone.
well, like the New York Hospital, which was a bastion of WASP philanthropy, all of a sudden realized there was Jewish money and they needed it, so they changed their norms. The same thing is true about symphony orchestras. It never wanted Jewish money. And as a result, a lot of the money that used to flow into Jewish causes and needs aren't there anymore. I'll give you another example. The Hartz Mountain family was historically extremely philanthropic to Jewish causes. The subsequent generations, and I've seen this in my own congregational experience, have taken on the role of, yeah, our grandfather and father used to give money to the synagogues. We'd like you to present us with a request for a proposal to the foundation. Okay? It's no longer just an assumption that they would give. It's now, well, we have to balance it all out and we have to see where it goes. Thank you. I hope we've covered something from it.
Thank you for.
Rabbi Laila, a perfect round of applause, congratulations.
If you look at, if Google Maimonides steps of Tzedakah,
Because I studied it, because I have to tell you, when I come to these things, I find a big. What's being taught was actually what is totally different. So today they have the JCCs on there, right? There's never all these donations, right? But they're listed, and they're listed for the people who gave them.
yeah,
But why did you put that?
because their goal is to raise as much money as they possibly can.
So it's about money, not about.
Yeah, like, yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, both.
Rabbi, you know, talk about the three temple.
Yeah, the
Was that,
reason why.
I mean, that there was no call to, are there, my noses come down, they show, so you know.
Well,
That
we are-
wouldn't be called.
we are taught that Moses, the people respond with Naaseh. We will do when we will listen.
Yeah.
When you kind of do an affirmation of what takes place in the song. Because when you look at this, you want to do something. It's getting could be a part. Doesn't necessarily.
What are we doing?
Just probably for on the top of the mountain.
Best alone. Dog, you know.
Yes.
Same here.
In fact, at his graduation, they had him read the Old Testament.
Well, think about. That's what history by students, it's quite culture was one. That was the legal term. Was really part of the. But it's. Old, when we have. Oh, my dad was a CPA. New Jersey, New York.
So it's not a I think, yeah, it's so I'm out to see it, and it's very interesting about the babies. Was that they used to have in Brooklyn, all these factories, just open.
Right, of course.
And I was diagnosed with they came in and they said, it says.
No, yeah.
This loosely means, yeah, Hebrew, non-debroch. Okay, it said non-debroch, yeah, you knew it was supposed to eat.
Yeah.
For celiac, because it would have no.
Now it's. It is saving dollars.
That's right, but now they're open all year round, and they're telling you it's free, which is just the, they thought backwards side. So, was there really that much of a divergence from what happened, people praying and sacrifice, and then they're just taking out the animals?
I think what you're saying is, and again, perspective that the first century was amazingly diverse and.
Yeah, we're gonna come to that.
You had this.
Temple destroyed in seven.
That is smart.
Second.
There was ongoing. In the two model,
But if you go back 1,500 years before that,
it was only.
but there was no concept
There
of.
was no.
No, but there was no, people weren't. Right, there was
No, they
the
brought
act
their,
of-
no, they brought their animals.
But that wasn't a form of giving.
Oh, of course it was just the model they knew. But it was also based on agrarian society, because your identity was based by your tribe and who and what you were. Now,
We're
in
supposed to have.
modern Western culture, in
In
the 12th or 13th century, we have the evolution. Beyond.
She just said, you know, there's houses.
Yeah, and I go some my way, if we knew that it's on, I don't know.
As
Where is?
the agrarian model starts to fall apart, and we have people living in Jerusalem.
That's her.
Well,
Okay.
because you're no longer your tribal unit, and rabbinic Judaism attempted to identity of people by being part of a community that was different in your
Yes,
people.
That kind of.
Yes.
Well, here's the interesting thing, one of the great,
Yeah.
one of the
And the person.
pieces of the Gospels,
About.
which is used as representation, and representation of Judaism, is that Jesus.
Was that night? So I'll always sit like.
Which is a good thing, money.
Met this is not, and we met last year, they're from outside of.
In the old days, you go to Europe today, you bring dollars, you gotta go to somebody.
It's a Friday night.
Or cash. In the old days, they were brokers
Well, I have to look.
that would go and change.
Yeah, not.
Before the euro, when you traveled in Europe, you would walk around French francs, Italian lira, German dollars, all of that, and they didn't necessarily interact with each other. You had to find a way. But the kind of
So.
temple in Jerusalem, you're coming from Turkey, but you are required to show up 3 times a year to make sacrifice. They have two cultures to do all that. And you come with Turkish, whatever. Whatever it is. You have to buy shower, whatever, temple mat. You're not having time here, and you have to change yours into the currency of the country you're in. So, to use that as an example of Jewish negativity is stupid, because you have no other function. But there are so many references. Christian gospel. Really out of, I don't think that's a downgrade to.
Basically what this. They use this build everything that all. The purpose. And then things and stuff are good, check mark of the game. What's going on? Set up for that's all have three. So it's actually, yeah. I didn't see yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. I told you so. I was back there, driver him. Yeah. It's here. But. Which is great. Jewish experience and things kind of informative. Right. And the fourth thing. Definitely fine. Easier job. Sarah over. The second thing was. Parsha no longer. Only a resurrection, even though the clay is the bottom. Yes, it's the day that where it's at. The third piece was no longer allowed to what he said. People could change start part. We were by the power of people that shut down from being more. It's I mean, we don't talk to people. I don't care. So better be. All right, go. That's it.
I did want to ask you. I did want to ask you. Well, I should say. Yeah, there are. Yeah, there are 20. So it's really a lot of things. How do we implement something that arouses and keeps us connected? And I think that's the bottom line. Okay.
They drink the owl out. And in the closet. Well, that's the only thing we have to do is have water on me. The cream, you think, I should put the, you can leave it. Or maybe you know what, put it in the freezer for about 5 minutes. Sweet chance. 10 minutes, yeah. And, it's about coffee, I think. And, okay, I got 3 minutes and then any of this would be both for you. Yeah, I got the cold water over here. Oh, so you can take that one with you. Okay, I'll fix that. Thank you for your help. There's a mop in the closet there. The mop in there.
Huh? What? Midday possible, it's possible. Next week.